Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to this Food Safety Essentials webinar, our regular webinars with our good friend Tony Connor. Today, preliminary steps to hazard analysis. So welcome, everybody. Say hello in the chat. How are you doing, Tony?
Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody.
Yep, we've got just short of 1,000 registered. We've got 92 live right now. So yeah, tell us where you're joining from. Kelly, first one in there, New Orleans. Bernard, regular from Van Wijk, Belgium. Yeah, over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome. This is the 8th Food Safety Essentials session. And what we do is once a month is we try and get together and have a general food safety question and answer session. So we'll throw that open later. But what I like to do is just do, excuse me, a short presentation for each month, and then go through any questions you have about the presentation, and then any general food safety questions you might have. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is the 8th session. The previous 7 are on the website. Previously, we've looked at US recall data, the causes and measures to prevent them. In actual fact, 75% of all recalls were due to contamination with environmental pathogens or incorrect labeling and undeclared allergens. We've looked at importance of inspections or good practice audits. We've looked at internal auditing. We've looked at new product development. We've looked at the most common SQF certification audit non-conformances and making positive use of complaints. So today I'm going to talk about the preliminary steps to hazard analysis as per Codex General Principles of Food Hygiene and the main GFSI benchmark standards. So this is a key element of GFSI benchmarking requirements, hazard and risk management systems, as well as food safety management systems and good industry practices. And the requirement is for a certification scheme to have a systematic hazard and risk management system or HACCP system based on the current version of Codex Alimentarius General Principles of Food Hygiene. So if we look at the at the certification standards ourselves and SQF Food Safety Code, a food safety plan shall be prepared in accordance with the 12 steps identified in the Codex Alimentarius Commission HACCP guidelines. For BRC, Global Standard for Food Safety, the company shall have a fully implemented and effective food safety plan incorporating the Codex Alimentarius HACCP principles. There's also a requirement in there for prerequisite programs. The site shall establish and maintain environmental and operational programs necessary to create an environment suitable to produce safe and legal food products. Moving on to the IFS food standard. The basis of the company's food safety management system shall be a fully implemented, systematic and comprehensive HACCP-based plan following the Codex Alimentarius principles, good manufacturing practices, good hygienic practices, and any legal requirements of the production and destination countries. Onto the FSSC 22000 certification scheme, where we've got ISO 22000, food safety management systems, requirements for any organization in the food chain. In section 2, it requires prerequisite programs, which include or should include an applicable ISO 22002 series, which I'll mention a bit later, and where we require hazard control, preliminary steps, characteristics of raw materials that I'll come back to later, characteristics of end products, intended use, flow diagrams, descriptions of processes and process environment before we move on to hazard analysis. Excuse me. So as per the Codex General Guidelines for the application of a HACCP system, prior to the application of a HACCP system, food businesses should have in place prerequisite programs including good hygienic practices. So these include good manufacturing practices, maybe standard operating procedures, requirements for design, layout, constructions of buildings and facilities, maintenance programs for equipment and buildings, things like rework control, waste control, equipment, transport, preventive maintenance, pest control, pest management, cleaning and sanitation, cleaning and disinfection facilities, processes to prevent contamination, environmental monitoring, personal hygiene requirements, other hygiene requirements, raw material receipt and storage, prevention of chemical and physical contamination, allergen control and allergen management. Okay. Product labeling there as well. If we go back to the FSSC 22000 scheme, you'll note that the ISO 22002 series have been updated in 2025. The key changes of note include new requirements for systems for recycling and reuse, additional equipment requirements, additional allergen control requirements, a new section on chemical contamination, extensive rewording of pest control and additional requirements for control and eradication, new requirements for food defense, and new requirements for food fraud prevention. There's also an annex of examples of food defense measures and an annex of example of food fraud mitigation measures. If you see this topic on the website, or if you go to this topic on the website, there's a summary posted there of the changes between ISO 22001 with the requirements of 22002, 100 and 22001 to 2025. So that's prerequisite programs on food safety, requirements for food, feed and packaging supply chain, and prerequisite programs on food safety for food manufacturing. Back to preliminary steps and hazard analysis. Prerequisite programs should be well established, fully operational and verified, and where possible, in order to facilitate the successful application and implementation of the HACCP system. HACCP application will not be effective without prior implementation of prerequisite programs, including good hygienic practices. The steps in HACCP application include preliminary steps, and then the subsequent steps are Principle 1 to 7. Relevant information needed to conduct the hazard analysis in step 6 needs to be collected, maintained, documented, and updated. So we need to bear this in mind during the preliminary steps. So those steps are: assemble the HACCP team and identify the scope, describe the product, identify intended use and users, construct a flow diagram, confirm the flow diagram on site. So assembling the HACCP team. People with appropriate knowledge and expertise are required to develop an effective HACCP system. This can be achieved using a multidisciplinary team. A core team should be utilized within the company to conduct HACCP studies. This core team should be supplemented by other staff when specific areas or products are being analyzed. Your food safety HACCP team leader needs to have in-depth knowledge of Codex HACCP principles or equivalent and be able to demonstrate competence, experience, and training. There may also be legal requirements for specific training, such as for PCQIs, Preventive Control Qualified Individuals. Also note that senior management should be supporting the HACCP team as appropriate. The scope. The HACCP team should identify the scope of the HACCP system and applicable prerequisite programs. The scope should describe which food products and processes are covered. Products with similar characteristics and processing steps may be grouped, such as different grades and sizes of pasteurized milk, different types of cheeses in another group, different types of yogurt in another group, different types of butter in another group, etc. Define the scope of the products and the processes the HACCP system covers, from ingredients intake right through to the customer. On to 2 and describe the product. A full product description of the product is required to ensure that all aspects could potentially affect food safety are considered. So we need to include relevant safety information such as composition, including raw materials, ingredients, allergens, and recipes, the origin of the ingredients, physical and chemical characteristics that may impact on food safety, such as available water, pH, preservatives, allergen, processing methods and technologies, heat treatment, freezing, drying, brining, smoking, etc. Product packaging and packaging systems. There might be modified atmosphere, vacuum packing, or other packaging, such as canning. Bottles, plastic bottles. Storage and distribution conditions, so ambient, frozen, chilled. Maximum shelf life under prescribed storage and usage conditions. Any limits relevant to the food product already established for hazard should be considered and accounted for in the HACCP plan, such as limits for food additives, regulatory microbiological criteria, maximum allowed veterinary medicine residues, and things like times and temperatures for heat treatment, which are prescribed in legislation. Good practice is not to simply describe the product, but consider the best possible implications of what will be needed later in the HACCP study. For example, when considering the origin of ingredients, rather than just stating the material comes from a specific country or region, it may be useful to consider whether potential climatic conditions, cultural or food safety standards in the country change the hazards. The next step is to identify intended use and users. The intended use should be based on the expected uses of the product by the end user or consumer. Consider the intended use of the product. Is the product intended as an ingredient for further cooking? Is the product ready to eat? The description may be influenced by external information on ways in which consumers are known to use the product other than those intended. An alternative use may occur in the consumer's home, such as a consumption of a product that looks ready to eat without completing the correct cooking, or elsewhere in the supply chain, such as an intended use for raw material. So consider that if the product is intended to be cooked. A number of product recalls have occurred, for example, with frozen raw vegetables and coated battered poultry products due to unintended use of the product because they needed to be cooked. Vulnerable groups of the population may have to be considered. Is the product intended for babies, infants, children, or adults? Is the product intended for a wide spectrum of the population? Is the product likely to be consumed by high-risk groups? In specific cases like care homes or hospitals, vulnerable groups of the population may have to be considered. Where foods are being produced specifically for a vulnerable population, it may be necessary to enhance process controls, monitor control measures more frequently, verify controls are effective by testing products, or conduct other activities to provide a high level of assurance that the food is safe. Also, where a claim is made regarding the suitability of the food for individuals with a food allergy or food sensitivity, you need to ensure that production process is fully validated to meet the stated claim and the effectiveness of the process is routinely verified. The next step is to construct a flow diagram. A flow diagram covers all the steps in the production of a specific product, including any applicable rework. The same flow diagram may be used for a number of products that are manufactured using similar processing steps. The flow diagram should indicate all inputs, including those of ingredients and food contact materials, water and air if relevant. Complex manufacturing operations can be broken down into smaller, more manageable modules and multiple flow diagrams. The flow diagram should be used when conducting the hazard analysis as a basis for evaluating the possible occurrence, increase, decrease, or introduction of hazards. Flow diagram should, as appropriate, include the sequence and interaction of the steps in the operation, where raw materials, ingredients, processing aids, packaging materials, utilities, and intermediate products enter the flow, any outsourced processes, where any reworking or recycling takes place, where end products, intermediate products, waste, and byproducts are released or removed. Flow diagrams should be clear, accurate, and sufficiently detailed to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. So this is another example of a flow diagram. The steps are numbered and named. You could add process parameters for key elements, such as pasteurization and cooling. Don't forget to ensure legal requirements for control measures, such as pasteurization, need to be documented. And later, you could identify critical control points on the flow diagram. So that would be after the hazard analysis. The next step is the on-site confirmation of the flow diagram. The best means to make sure your flow diagram is accurate is to have the HACCP team confirm it is accurate by walking through the plant and making sure all the steps in the process are included in the flow diagram. Steps should be taken to confirm the processing activities against the flow diagram during all stages and hours of operation, and amend the flow diagram where appropriate. The confirmation of the flow diagram should be performed by a person or persons with sufficient knowledge of the processing operation. A flow diagram can be assisted with a map of the premises and equipment layout, and a water distribution diagram, and an indication of zones where high risk, high care, or ambient high care production facilities are required. So the final part of that step there is to have the HACCP team sign off that diagram physically, which I prefer to do on a form. I just want to mention briefly, we've got water as an ingredient here, and your flow diagram can be assisted with a water distribution diagram for the site. This is especially important when water is used as an ingredient. Based on experience, I would also confirm the water distribution system, as I have found massive dead ends in clean water supply by physically walking the clean water supply pipework, just as you would the process flow for products. So I think that's an important aspect to consider. I'd like to look back at FSSC 22030 certification scheme, and particularly at ISO 22000. And this is an area where ISO 22000 addresses in detail something that isn't covered in as much detail and codex and the main benchmark standards, and that's characteristics of raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials, which are obviously important in preparation for your hazard analysis. So ISO 22000 requires that the organisation shall ensure that all applicable statutory and regulatory food safety requirements are identified for all raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials. The organisation shall maintain documentation concerning all materials, ingredients, and product contact materials to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis, including, as appropriate, biological, chemical, and physical characteristics, composition of formulated ingredients, including additives and processing aids, source, place of origin, method of production, method of packaging and delivery, storage conditions and shelf life, preparation and handling before use or processing, acceptance criteria related to food safety, and all specifications of purchased materials and ingredients appropriate to their intended use. So you need to be listing product ingredients, packaging materials, and incoming raw materials that need to be covered in your preliminary steps. Your team should have identified these ingredients and raw materials in your product description And then you need to make sure you have sufficient information to conduct your hazard analysis in the next stage. I do this by ensuring I have sufficient supplier information and specifications for all raw materials, ingredients, packaging. When carrying out preliminary steps, we need to be aware of the hazards that we're looking for. So potential biological, bacteria, viruses and parasites, chemical, physical, allergen hazards should be included. Radiological hazards may also need to be considered. This will help in step 6, which is principle 1. List all potential hazards that are likely to occur and associated with each step. Conduct a hazard analysis to identify the significant hazards and consider any measures to control identified hazards. And as well as a product description, really we should have a full finished product specification for the HACCP team to refer to. Okay, resources and supporting information are important. So stuff like latest scientific literature, information on historical and known hazards associated with your products, relevant codes of practice, food safety legislation, relevant production and sale of products, customer requirements. Codex itself has plenty of specific guidelines for different products and codes of practices. Government food safety websites and publications, so USDA, food standards in Australia, New Zealand, EFSA, food safety standards agencies in Canada, UK, India, etc. There might also be industry guidance and trade associations or member organizations, or you might also have existing HACCP plans. Excuse me. You might have existing HACCP plans that can provide useful information. So finally, I just mentioned this hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls for human food guidance for industry. This is a document I quite like, and there's a couple of examples of the sort of information that's in there, which is a quick reference guides for hazards that may be intentionally introduced for the purposes of economic gain. So that would be fraud, but there's lots of useful tables like that in there. And also for your products, there are tables of known or reasonably foreseeable hazards for all sorts of different products. So that's useful and well worth looking at. Okay, we're on to questions and answers now.
Okay, a few questions. First one from Ahmed. Are we going on webcam, Tony, or are you staying off?
No, I'm hiding.
Okay, first question from Ahmed. Let me just get that up.
Excuse me a second.
Is the flowchart signed by all the HACCP team members or just the team leader?
No, it should be signed by all the members, I think. That's what I would do, yes. I mean, up to you how you want to do it, but I prefer for all the team members to sign it.
Okay.
Otherwise, what evidence do you have that the team's checked it? If only the team leader signed it, the only evidence you've got is the team leader signed it off, but you want the whole team to sign it off.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, just let me finish on that, sorry.
Sure.
I had an engineer, a guy called Frederick, really good guy on our HACCP team, and he was the one that helped to spot the issue with the water distribution system at one of the new factories I worked at. So yeah, it's important that all your guys from from each department contribute, to that, because it could have been a massive problem.
Yeah, it just adds a little bit of commitment as well, doesn't it? I suppose.
Sure, and a bit of pride. Maybe they're an important part of the HACCP team. They're signing the document.
Yeah, good point. Okay, question from Andrew. Could you provide some guidance on radiological hazards?
Not much, really. I mean, you're probably better off searching, but there's like cesium, iodine. I can't remember the numbers of them that I think were related to nuclear disasters. And then there's some sources of water, I think, particularly in the US, that might have some degree of radiological, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but they're generally sourced from either water or nuclear disasters. The big one is the one in Japan and Chernobyl that affected the food chain, and then there's some which are for water in the US. I think it tends to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sonia. I work for a company where we make paper plates. Water is not part of the ingredient. Do we need to do annual water tests for microbiological hazards?
Yeah. Well, I think if you're supplying paper plates, people are going to eat their food off them, so they're food contact. So you want potable water for cleaning and hand washing in your facility. So I would say you want to make sure that you do that your water's potable, that it's acceptable to use for that. So yes, some testing, but obviously you would probably not think it's a bigger risk as where people are using water as an ingredient or in a food factory.
Okay. Marvi, FSPCA requires radiological hazards. How would you recommend to handle the requirement for a product ingredient not typically affected by that hazard?
Well, I think you just need to make sure that you've done your homework, that you're buying ingredients are in from an area that isn't likely to be affected by radiological hazards. So you need to do your research there. So it might be your water source, or it might be ingredients. So it could be that you're buying fish from off the Japan Sea or from the Japan Sea and might be concerned about residual radiation levels there, or from old fallout from the old Chernobyl disaster, because I think that there's still some level of radiation left, but obviously not as great a degree.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
So you need to, you need to do your research, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Question. No problem. Question from Pauline. Can a company prepare a HACCP checklist to prepare ahead of any type of hazard that may occur in the future?
Yeah, you can say, well, you can do a checklist of things that you want to check, which is obviously you're doing in your preliminary steps. So you're looking at all different types of hazard categories that I've mentioned already, including allergens. You're following for raw materials, ingredients, 3 steps. So yes, you can, but you need to look at all your ingredients coming in and your finished product and knowing what hazards are associated with those.
Great. Question from Mukhtar. Is there a specific number of HACCP team members required?
No, but I think I've already, in the slides that you saw, that it's useful to have contribution from people in different departments, including production, processing, laboratory, quality or technical, sometimes purchasing for fraud. but basically a broad range across your operation, depending on, what type of operation you're talking about. So no, there isn't a requirement. Smaller organizations find it difficult, so I'd say it should be like a minimum of 2 or 3, not 1 person. But maybe it could be 6 or 8. Let's say 6 or 8 people, but you probably don't want too many more. What you might want to do is pick people off that are involved in specific roles and get them on the team when you're looking at that step in the process. So bring in people that are experts in the specific steps that you're looking for, rather than the whole of the flow diagram.
Okay, just a comment from Marvin. Just to comment, some gases used for beverages may be affected by radiological hazards. Moji, is a HACCP plan required for warehouses storing food and non-food items?
Yeah. I mean, if you're storing food, you need a HACCP plan. Yes. Obviously, when you're storing non-food items, you want to know what they are and make sure they're not tainting, and have adequate segregation and spillage controls in place. So you wouldn't want to have something nasty non-food that's stored above food in your warehouse. So you need to carefully allocate where the things are being stored and have adequate segregation and spillage controls in place.
Okay, Tatiana, what do you think about AI applied HACCP system?
I think when I've looked at AI stuff, I think on the basics it might be okay, but I read some stuff and it's just tosh, so it's hit or miss.
Okay. Geeta, would it be good to create a recall SOP as part of your HACCP management?
Yeah, I mean, in the Codex General Principles, recall requirements for recall procedure and management are in that guidance document. So yeah, that's part of the prerequisite programs that the Codex guidelines recommend.
Okay. Question from Soundarajan. Is any qualification required for HACCP team members? On which basis we have to select them?
Well, they all should have HACCP training, and we'll come on and talk about that towards the end, because we do offer HACCP training. But first of all, your team leader should really be qualified to a minimum of an intermediate level, and so by that I would say a minimum of 16 hours HACCP training, which is a sort of thing. That's what I would recommend, and the rest of the team need to have a base understanding of HACCP systems, how to development, and HACCP principles and good practices. Yeah.
Okay. Megan is asking, what might be the most common part that you've come across on the other end? Is there anything teams unnecessarily do, thinking of blind spots? Common issues?
But the most common thing I would think is probably in the flow diagram, in missing out steps, or it not being 100% correct because it's written in an office. That's why it's important to go out and walk the flow diagram through the facility and make sure that's exactly what is happening.
Okay, sounds good. And Kwame. Is it mandatory that the HACCP team leader be the quality and food safety manager?
It only needs to be somebody that's qualified, and qualified could be through experience, but usually the expectation is for the HACCP team leader to have a HACCP qualification. That's the expectation from most auditors and certification standards. But it doesn't have to be the food safety and quality manager, but it usually is, I would say.
Okay, that more or less answers Bernard's question. Does somebody of the management need to be a member of the HACCP team?
They don't need to be a member of the HACCP team, but I think it certainly helps the credibility of a HACCP team if you've got a senior member of site management on your team.
Yeah. Question from Harla. Do you think food fraud is a hazard that should be identified?
I think you should be thinking about it when you're developing or going through your preliminary steps and noting where there's possible risks, and then usually it's addressed together with supplier approval and purchasing. But in your preliminary steps and gathering information for the HACCP, it's worthwhile noting any potential errors. And I think if I just click back, where was it? Yeah, to here. If you see in here, this is a hazard analysis guideline for industry, and they mention and refer to hazards introduced for economic gain, which is obviously food fraud. So, yep, you certainly should be considering it, but I don't do it all together myself. Some people might do, but I prefer to then tackle it separately with an expert that might be from purchasing, maybe leading that team.
Okay. Question from Arifa. Can any HACCP plan have zero CCP ever? Explain with one example. You can have a HACCP plan with no CCPs as per Codex guidelines, where in question 1 of the new recommended decision tree, the first question is, do GHPs, good hygienic practices, adequately control the control measure? And now, if that's the case, yes, then you don't need, it isn't a CCP, so that might be part of your HACCP plan, and your good hygienic practice needs to be adequately documented, adequately controlling the hazard. That needs to be verified that the hygienic practice is in place and working correctly, and that might be something like monitoring cleaning on a meat slicer, where it's vitally important it's clean and doesn't carry over bacteria, and particularly it's usually Listeria monocytogenes, from not being cleaned properly. So that would be an example in catering or a process where you might have a HACCP plan where something's controlled by the good hygienic practice rather than a critical control point in a process. Okay. Bernard, I'm not familiar with this, maybe you are. Must PFAS be considered as a hazard with appropriate measures? Nearly impossible. PFAS?
I don't know what he means.
I don't know if it's a typo or if you can explain a little more clearly. Bernard, please. Rosario, is it mandatory in auditing to highlight the decision tree in the risk assessment?
You can use, Rosario, you can use whatever methodology you like, as long as it's logical and you can justify it. Now, I quite like the decision tree, so I use that. And I use it in Excel and color code the questions. Now, other people prefer to use a worksheet or some alternative methodology, but I quite like the decision tree and think it works for me. Yeah, it's the other thing about it. It's quite logical. It's yes, no. Now, some of these to specific questions. Now, some of the methodology prescribed just says, is this a CCP in your HACCP plan, without any logic to the question. It's not a specific question. It's should it be or not. Where the questions are, does this, in the decision tree, does this control measure control the hazard adequately, etc.
Okay, question from Cassandra. Does the HACCP have to be based on Codex, or is it justifiable to use an alternative system if it still uses the Codex steps?
You don't have to use the Codex system, but if you're using if you're getting certification to a GFSI benchmark standards, then you can see I've already given you examples. They all prescribe using the Codex methodology. But if you've got a logical alternative system, then you could use that.
Okay, great. Question from Mukhtar. Is there any HACCP modifications interval or timing, e.g. making review and modification yearly?
HACCP
review and modify.
You should review annually as a minimum, or when there are changes. Now that might be not just changes on site, but changes or in legislation or industry recommendations, or it might be if you should review your HACCP plan if you've had a recall.
Okay. Should the HACCP manual be updated immediately the team leader resigns, or only the section outlining the members, whilst the main review is kept at annual frequency?
So I presume by resigns you mean I wouldn't change the HACCP manual just because somebody's left the company, if that's what you mean. Because obviously other members will be involved. But what I would do, the new person coming in, and if they're supposed to be the team leader, then they will need to come in and get on board and have ownership of that. And so that I think you would be wanting the new person to review it within a few months of being on board.
Okay. Cassandra just said, thank you. Our alternative has always been the Camden decision tree, but it has come under scrutiny by auditors, quoting it must be Codex.
Well, the standards quote Codex, but some of them put in like a disclaimer that, as long as you're using a logical alternative, that's fine.
Okay. And back to Bernard's question from previously about PFAS in the chat. Everybody's been saying forever plastics, PFAS or forever chemicals, pure fluoroalkyl substance. PFAS equals pure fluoroalkyl substances.
Yeah, I mean, you'll need to look at industry data and see if there's any particular food that's associated with accumulation of them, and if it's something, if your product is something that should be routinely screened, and usually the likes of Codex put in guidelines on recommended levels, and people tend to do annual testing, so they wouldn't be considered as significant hazards because they might kill people over 100 years, but they aren't going to kill them tomorrow.
Okay. Right. Sandra Darajan has just added, HACCP is only applicable for CCP and OPRP. I don't know if that's a question or...
I don't know it is, but I mean, yeah, HACCP is applicable for everything because in the first stages, you're ensuring you've got prerequisite programs and good hygienic practices in place. That gives you a sound platform for then developing your HACCP system. Now, those good hygienic practices and prerequisite programs may mean you don't actually have CCPs or OPRPs, but quite a lot of people do find that they do have CCPs and OPRPs.
Okay. Very good. Okay, I think that's all the questions for now. If you want to move to the next part, and then if anybody does have a further question, you can just add it while we're chatting.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to mention that we've got a range of implementation packages that we offer for the main GFSI standards, including BRC, SQF, FSSC 22000, IFS, covering food and FSMA, packaging, storage, agents and brokers. All the packages tend to contain editable food safety management system procedures, prerequisite program templates that are in Microsoft Word templates format. There's record templates. There's additional guidance, implementation tools, startup guide, a workbook, and we provide free online technical support until you achieve certification. Okay, and we do offer a 15% discount to anybody that joins our Food Safety Essential webinars. So the offers, in the offers tab there, if you click on the Find Out More, there's a 15% off code to use. Okay. And
I'll include that just to say in the follow-up email, we'll be sending the recording, a copy of the slides, but I'll also put the links to these in the follow-up email so you can look in. There's no massive pressure right now. You can look at it, come back and ask questions if you need to, and if you're interested. That 15% discount is exclusive to members of these webinars, registrants. So, and then the other thing we've got coming up is we've got HACCP training, 4-hour HACCP training, October the 17th, Friday.
Yeah, so it's more and more HACCP related. So we've done some preliminary steps today, but we'll go through a lot more detail on things, including good manufacturing practices and moving on to hazard analysis. It's a 4-hour course. We also cover terms and definitions, types of contamination, prevention of contamination, a little bit of a look at how FSMA and preventive controls rule affects HACCP. And then afterwards, there's an online exam to take. Yeah, so that's in 2 weeks on Friday, and is $97 a person. I'll move that one for next. I'll move that up a bit so we don't hide. $97 a person per person, so not bad value at all, really.
Yeah, and so you can do your whole team, as you mentioned. Like I think people ask what training is required, and I think you say,
Yes.
Tony, the team, the HACCP team leader needs to be at a higher level, but this is
the HACCP. Anybody in the HACCP team can take that. It's not for the team leader, but anybody in the HACCP team. So it's $97 per person. So we think it's good value.
Yeah. Okay. And we do get lots of full HACCP teams coming along, and it's really good because then obviously you're all involved with the discussion together. You're seeing the same training, and afterwards they often have a debriefing and use it as a basis for improvement of their HACCP systems. It is very practical. Okay, so these will be in the follow-up email anyway. So, quick question from Munir. Intended use of products may include hazards. Functional use of products may not easily measured or control. How do we consider these in the HACCP plan?
You don't need to measure them. You need to consider if there is a possible intended use. So somebody thinking something's cooked when it isn't, or somebody eating cookie dough, which is a classic one, which isn't cooked, obviously. So you need to think about what people are likely to do with your product that could be a hazard. And so you might need to provide adequate instructions to make sure that hazard doesn't affect the consumer. So instructions on the label, in big letters, this needs to be cooked, or etc. So instructions to the end user to prevent that hazard becoming a problem.
Super.
Yeah.
And another question from Caitlin. How often do you recommend a person takes HACCP training if you are PCQI certified?
Depends how much you're involved on a day-to-day basis with HACCP systems. So, a reminder course every few years, but I've only taken one HACCP training course in 30 years. So depends really. If you're using and gaining knowledge all the time, then you don't need to be trained every year.
It's always good as a refresher though, because obviously through discussions and just looking at HACCP in different ways with different people and different, like with some of these training courses.
I think for HACCP teams, I'm thinking of a PCQI, qualified individual as a team leader. I wouldn't do that all the time, but certainly reminders, and for base trained HACCP team members, then yes, maybe regular every 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
good.
Yes, so I'll just load your certificate in the sidebar, everybody, so you can download that and add your name to it. We've gone the full hour, and I think Dennis just said very informative session. Thanks, Serge, for this opportunity, and several thanks there. So that's great. So we'll be doing these every month. They'll be on a Wednesday, so just keep an eye out for the emails, etc. We'll be doing them once a month on a Wednesday, and that's in addition to the Food Safety Fridays. So hope you enjoyed it. So thanks very much, Tony.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your